As Josie introduced, I'm Krishnan. I'm an old age psychiatrist and a liaison psychiatrist, and I'm delighted to be here for this informal network meeting. And we are a group of old age psychiatrists who also happen to be liaison psychiatrists, trying to work together into a partnership, developing interested professionals to have a network, both medical and non-medical specialties, and including not only UK, but around the world, to look at consultation liaison psychiatry as for the older adults as a network. So that's the key aim for this network. Next slide, please. Just to warm up, we were thinking about how to, engage you guys, even though it's not a terribly interactive platform, but just to get you guys going, we're going to use Slido. We just want to find out who you are, in your professional capacity. So there's going to be a Slido on that one. Next slide, please. So if you have got a smartphone, you can scan the QR code on your screen, or you can, if it's on a computer, if you go to slido.com and hashtag 243345, you will be able to vote or reply who you are. Just take a couple of minutes just to think about it. Got community geriatricians, welcome. Occupational therapist, team manager, RMan, doctor, foundation doctor, clinical psychologist. It's really a multidisciplinary participation. This is exactly what we wanted. I'm sure Annabel, Liz, and Josie would, it's music to our ears and a visual feast to our eyes that you could see that. Sometimes we do, as a part of liaison psychiatry, we do need to have that MDT involvement. It's nice to have such a big group of people coming in. Welcome to you all. I think we've got 53 people have voted. I'll give them a few more minutes to. We've got discharge liaison team, liver transplant, hire trainee. Wow, welcome. I think it's nice to capture that, it is everybody's business. Somebody needs to let them in. Okay, we'll try to do that, Nahid. Okay. Shall we go on to the next slide, please? So which country you are based, so UK, outside, any other countries abroad, England? We've got a participant from Chile, India and UK, Wales. I'm sure the network will go global and more people will join as we form and develop. So welcome to you all. We've got 63 people who have voted. So thank you for engaging with that. Next slide, please, Annabel. So as I just briefly mentioned, liaison psychiatry services for older adults is a growing field. And in England alone, specifically, the NHS long-term plan tried to look at 100% coverage of core 22-24 liaison services by 2028. However, the 2018 liaison survey indicated the coverage is only about 33%. So we still need to be doing more for old age liaison services. And the key reason to set this up is to bring our multidisciplinary team who are delivering care to our older adults in acute hospital, bring them together, develop an informal network, but with a view to improving our own understanding, learning, as well as ongoing work on delivering that service. I think that's the whole idea of this network. So I'm going to hand over to Annabel Price, the chair of the liaison faculty, to take over. Thank you, Annabel. You need to unmute, Josie.
Hi, hello. Hi, it's so lovely to see 92 people in this meeting. Welcome everyone, it's really exciting. And I also know from examples like my team that it's not just 92 people, that there are some people who've registered, and then there's a sort of a party going on in the department. So I think we're probably well over 100 with everybody there, and how exciting to have such a diverse group of people from actually diverse geographical locations, all interested in the same thing, which is the mental health of older people in the acute hospital. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes just running through some of what we know about the care of older people in the acute hospital and some key papers. And I know that quite a few of you in the room here have been involved in research into older people's mental health in the acute hospital. And so if I mention a paper you've been involved with, you can give us a wave and let us know. And the other thing I'd like is if there's some evidence, if there's been projects you've been involved with, if there are links that you'd like to share around models and outcomes for Old Age Liaison, then share them in the chat. This is part of us just trying to build up a real understanding of this area of work. So what do we know about Old Age Liaison? Well, we know that 60% of older people in an acute hospital will have a mental health problem of some kind, but we know that a small minority of ward admissions are seen by a liaison service. What about specialist older adults liaison teams? Well, we know that around a quarter of acute hospitals will have a separate older adults team, although many more acute hospitals will have more integrated teams, so an adult team that looks after working age and old age adults. And so there are various models of care. There's a study, my team were involved in it, and I know a number of services around the country were involved in looking at trends of ED presentations with self-harm and suicidal thoughts, and that we know that older people are presenting in greater numbers to the ED with self-harm and suicidal ideas. And so this is a growing area for us in Old Age Liaison, which is the more sort of acute ED focused mental health care. What do Old Age Liaison services do? Well, this was a study that came out of King's College Hospital a couple of years ago, where a team looked at consecutive referrals over a number of years and looked at several thousand referrals to look at what the mental health diagnoses were, what the management was, and what are the main presentations that we see in Old Age Liaison. Well, broadly speaking, we do a lot of work in the 3 Ds, dementia, depression, and delirium, and look after lots of patients with adjustment disorders or adjustment reactions, often related to very difficult stays in hospital, that we do lots of capacity assessments as part of our work, either specialist capacity assessments or thinking about capacity as part of our clinical work. But that's really a sort of a core of work, but it's as broad as there is sort of mental disorders. So, I'm sure many of you working in Old Age Liaison teams will know that there's a huge range of the work that we get involved with, and a huge amount of interaction with colleagues, both within the hospital and outside. However, evidence for effectiveness of specific models of liaison, both generally and in old age, is limited. And there was a systematic review that came out very recently that looked at the evidence, and that there are very few studies sort of really testing different models. And that's something that we may be thinking about as a group, is how do we know what works best and what is sort of most effective. See if I can move my slide forward. There we go. So within the group here, and I think that 99 of us, as we've had a couple more people join us since I started talking, will represent and be part of services across a wide geographical area. I think most of you will probably be in sort of England and Wales, but from a huge range of services. And even within the UK, there'll be a range of different service models. So some services will be entirely nurse-led, some will be much more multidisciplinary with medical involvement. Some of you will work in all age services. Some of you will be working in a separate old age service. So I work in a specific older people's service in my service. That some of you will be commissioned by the acute hospital. That's a minority, I would suspect. Most old age liaison services are actually commissioned and provided by mental health services that take place within the acute hospital. And there are varying levels of integration within the acute hospital. So, just in terms of how much old age liaison is integrated into the systems throughout the hospital service. Most services, though, will operate on a sort of a referral response type model, so that there will be a mechanism for receiving referrals and then responding to those. But there has been some testing of alternatives to that sort of model. And again, my service and probably a few of you in this room were involved in the home study, which was testing a more proactive psychological medicine model for older people to see if that made any impact on length of stay, readmission, and longer term health outcomes. So there's lots of really interesting work going on looking at the success of different models. So that's just really a bit of an overview, and please feel free to add other evidence and studies into the chat. We'd be really interested in hearing your experience, particularly those of you who are working outside the UK. We're really interested in thinking about international collaboration and learning from each other around the world. So I'm just going to move on now and just briefly say what our vision was. So we sort of got together in a room and we thought we'd really like to set up a network of old age people interested in the mental health of older people in the acute hospital. And that's a bit of a mouthful, but what that means is it takes in both people working in specialist services, people who are interested, who may want to set up services, but also people who are not working in mental health services, who share that interest so that we can work together. And not just clinicians. We've had people interested who work primarily in law, for example, thinking about legal aspects. And I'm really pleased that we've got our speaker here today to think about that. So why are we here? Well, we want to provide a system of peer support. Sometimes people in old age liaison services can feel like they're a little bit isolated. And so this is a place to come together to be able to share ideas, get to know each other, get to know how each other work, and to learn from each other. To provide access to CPD opportunities, which are specific to the patient group that we look after. We want to raise the profile of old age liaison psychiatry. So when I started my training, I think I was one of 11 dual trained liaison psychiatrists who trained in old age. What I'm delighted to see is that there is a real increase in people who are specially trained and people who are working in the area. We've had things like credentialing to be able to increase expertise, and it's great to see that this is a growing specialty. So we want to also see better collaboration and integration within disciplines and pathways, and also an opportunity to lobby for improvements in mental health services for older people in the general hospital. I think this is really an area for development, and certainly a collective voice around that is much more powerful. So those are our visions, and but we would very much welcome an opportunity to develop those, and we again welcome your views and your input, and that feedback form that we will provide for you again at the end gives an opportunity for you to tell us what you want to. Okay, so I'm going to hand back now to Josie, who's going to open up a bit of discussion perhaps at this point, and to tell you about the CPD that we have organised for you.
Hi, thanks so much, Annabel. Sorry, I am just busy trying to admit people because we've still got people joining us, which is amazing.
Oh, brilliant.
103 now, so that's fantastic. So nice to see so many of you, and lovely to see people using the chat as well. So Alex Ruck Keene has joined us now. He's joined the meeting. So just checking the time, it's about 20 past. Annabel, Krish, do you want to have a bit of discussion now before we move on to Alex's talk?
I think that would be great. It may be that people want to tell us a bit about themselves, either through the chat or to unmute yourselves. It's always lovely to know that we're in company. So if anybody wants to perhaps tell us why they came today, what is it that they hope to get out of the meeting, or just to, you know, just to kind of introduce themselves and give us a bit of their thoughts. Maybe people can raise their hands if they'd like to speak.
Becca Chubb has said that she often felt like the odd one out as doctor with an interest in older adults in liaison. And I'm sure lots of people feel like that as well. And I'm really lucky in Surrey because we've got a group of us here because all of our acutes have got old age liaison consultants, which is amazing. But I think elsewhere it's quite different. So you may be quite isolated in terms of doing what you're doing. And a lot of the motivation behind this network was really kind of a need to be able to support each other with CPD and networking and professional development. It'd be interesting to hear if anybody else has had that experience. Liz just said about finding your tribe. Yeah, hopefully a network can help with this.
Do people have any questions that they'd like to ask? And it's not necessarily questions that we kind of set this up with a sense of wanting to kind of have a crowd to be able to move forward. So does anyone have any questions either for us as an organising group, or questions for anybody else or for the people who've joined us? Are there things that you'd like to know, things that you're curious about?
Tanya's got her hand up.
I was just going to say hello. I'm an emergency medicine consultant with a specialist interest in frailty in the emergency department. And one day a week, I work with the frailty service, which is mainly run by geriatricians. And just in answer to your question as to why I joined, I think this is one group, our older patients in an emergency crisis situation are one group that get a fairly rough deal, particularly our delirious patients. So I'm just really hoping to get lots of ideas and support to make things happen, to make our patients' experience an awful lot better.
It's great to meet you, Tanya. I'm delighted to have an ED specialist with us. Welcome, and I do hope that you stay along with us for the ride, and I hope that we are able to move things forward for patients in the ED.
You also have my 6-year-old with us, so
hello.
I'm sorry if I get distracted. They can't see you properly.
Your 6-year-olds are particularly welcome.
Liz, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've talked about, which is great why Tanya is here, is, you know, there's an increasing development of frailty pathways, and personally I feel really strongly that as old age liaison psychiatrists we have a key role to play within frailty pathways. They can't exist unless there's some attention to mental health, and that's something that we've discussed as a group in the organising team. So really interesting to hear people's thoughts about that, and anyone who's already actively providing input into frailty pathways, that would be great.
I can see Gillian's got a hand up, Josie.
Yeah, I've just unmuted Gillian. Gillian, say
Oh,
something.
yeah, actually, I was just, Gillian just popped out. This is Debbie from.
Oh, hello, Debbie.
Hi. We're an older adults liaison service from the Queen Elizabeth in Greenwich. And I just want to say hello from us. And it's really nice to have a network for just old age liaison network. We've been struggling for the past sort of 5 or 6 years to keep ourselves a speciality. because I think, you know, there's been some talk about absorbing us into the working age liaison team. We fought very hard to keep a separate service because we've got a totally different client group and the different needs, and we have a really nice different remit. So I just wanted to say hello and looking forward to it.
Welcome. It's really interesting to hear about different service models. I think we have got quite a lot of different service models across the UK and internationally as well. And this the kind of issue of having kind of ageless services with maybe sub teams within them or completely separate services is a really interesting one. So thank you. Any other points to cover? Oh, Elena, hi. I'm just going to unmute you. Hello, nice to see you again after a very long time. How are you?
Yeah, absolutely. Great, thank you. And it's brilliant to have the Old Age Network. So we work in a separate Old Age Liaison service, but when I started in the service, it was literally one band 6 in May. And it's been really difficult to get data to fight for any resources because a lot of the guidance is kind of focused on what you need as an overall service rather than specifically for older adults. And our adult teams weren't happy to see older adults and didn't feel that they were skilled enough. So it's trying to make sure that, you know, people are able to access the right type of assessment as well. But it'd be helpful to think about, you know, as a group, what our sort of standards would be for that, what our kind of staffing levels would be. It'd be interesting to know who offers, you know, sort of follow-ups and clinics and things like that as well. And I guess some of the outcome measures as well that don't always help with older adults. So some of the from LP work better with their functional patients rather than with the organic. So thinking a bit more as a group about that might be helpful as well.
Yeah, definitely. Certainly skills development for practitioners who are seeing people across the age range is a big issue, and has been one for me in my own service as well. And the outcome measures issue is a hot topic too. Yeah, thank you, Lena. I think we probably should start to move on to Alex's talk. What do you think, Annabel, Liz, Krish?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So I'm going to unshare my slides. If you make Alex a host.
I've got Alex's slide, so I can do that, so no worries. Keep talking in the chat and asking questions. We'll keep responding. And Alex, I'm just going to share your slides and I will unmute you. Okay. Bear with me. Okay, that should be working now. Just trying to find Alex. How are you, Alex? There you are. Thank
Great.
you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks so much, Josie, Annabel and Liz. It's a brilliant initiative. Although, can I say it's a brave idea that as part of the launch meeting to have some lawyer come and talk to you about deprivation of liberty safeguards and liberty protection safeguards. I think that might well count as an unwise decision. Be that as it may, what you asked me to do, and I will see if I can, is do a very quick whiz round of what might be coming down the line, or should be coming down the line in terms of the liberty protection safeguards, with a particular focus on what's going to be relevant for you, addressing the position of older adults. So we kind of need to go full Chris Whitty. If I could have the next slide, please. Excellent. So just reminding ourselves, orienting ourselves in terms of time and place. At the moment, we're grappling, or our situation when we're thinking about the cohort of people who may be deprived of their liberty, to provide them with, to need to provide them with care and treatment. We're either thinking about the Mental Health Act, or we're thinking about the deprivation of liberty safeguards. And I will talk a little bit about the future interface between the two regimes at the end. But just a reminder, deprivation of liberty safeguards 18 plus. You can self-authorize as a hospital for up to 14 days in effect. After that, you're in all sorts of trouble because you need the local authority to authorize. You yourself can't authorize beyond 14 days. Depending on where you are, you may find that your local authority is able to authorize before your urgent runs out. You may well find you're in a position that many managing authorities, hospitals are in, where you're waiting for a local authority to actually be able to complete its tasks. So the other thing we don't have at the moment is a definition of deprivation of liberty. We don't have a statutory definition of who it is, who's confined, who can't consent, and who the state knows about. We don't have a statutory definition. So that's the present state of affairs. Can I just get the next slide, please? Have you got a moment, Josie? Brilliant. Thank you. So coming down the line, we will, in due course, have an amendment, quite a hefty series of amendments to the Mental Capacity Act. Well, I have quite a hefty series of amendments, but what I wanted to do is just put them all on one slide rather than give you millions and millions of slides, partly because it's 4:30 and you don't need millions of slides, and partly because I think it's important just to put things on one slide, just so you have an overview. So in due course, when you come to look at the Mental Capacity Act, actually, I should say, if you Google already and you get legislation.gov.uk, the Mental Capacity Act, the very nice people who run it have really enthusiastically put up all of this stuff without telling you half of it's not in force, which is not very helpful. But in due course, the Mental Capacity Act is going to be amended in the following ways. It's not going to be amended right at the beginning, so it's not going to be amended to change the definition of what it means to lack capacity. The amendments and what it means to act in someone's best interest won't be changed. So that's sections 1 to, well, the principles, then sections 2, 3, and 4 aren't going to be changed. Then you hit section 4B of the Mental Capacity Act. All of you sleep with this under your pillow. But in due course, this is going to be very, very important in a hospital setting, section 4B. It's going to be doing two things which are going to be particularly important for you. The first is, it is going to answer a very serious legal problem you have at the moment, which is, this person is in ED, this person is saying, I'm presenting a suicidal ideation, you are wanting to do something, say, please can we look after you in some way, and the person is saying, no, I'm out of here. At the moment, you have a very serious legal problem as to whether or not you can hold them. Are you allowed to detain them, hold them there, while you carry out, for instance, assessments to determine whether they could be admitted under the Mental Health Act? That's being addressed because in due course, if it's an emergency and you need to deprive someone of their liberty, either to carry out life-sustaining treatment or prevent a serious deterioration in their condition, and you reasonably believe they lack capacity, you can just do that. So that's going to plug a really serious gap. It's also then going to provide the authority to recognize that someone's deprived of liberty and someone is doing something about it to authorize it. You're allowed to deprive the person of their liberty. You can also do it whilst waiting for the court to make its mind up. That doesn't really apply in a hospital setting. The Mental Capacity Act is going to be amended so that you can still get to the court of protection if you're subject to a deprivation of liberty safeguard. It's not going to be amended to include a statutory definition of deprivation of liberty, but the Department of Health and Social Care, in the Code of Practice, they're promising us, which is both going to update the main code relating to the MCA and then bolt on all the stuff about the LPS, is going to have a big old definition or a big old set of guidance about deprivation of liberty in a hospital, deprivation of liberty, including a lot about what's in a hospital setting. So that's important. That's going to be there for you. You're then going to track through and you're going to hit ultimately Schedule AA1, which is the liberty protection safeguards. It doesn't actually, it's not actually called that in the Act. It was called that by the Law Commission, and it's being rolled forward as a name. I can share the reason why it's called that. It was when I was at the Law Commission, it was the name that the lead lawyer, Tim Spencer Lane, and I hated least of all the suggestions that people put forward. We kept consulting as to what we should call it, and nobody could agree. Some people said, for God's sake, please don't mention anything to do with deprivation of liberty because you frighten families. And then other people said, call a spade a spade. We are depriving individuals of their liberty. We need to be clear what we're doing. So ultimately, this is a rather uncomfortable compromise. It's got the word liberty in, so that looks nice. It's got protection, that's good. Then it's got safeguards. What I really, really wish is two things in retrospect. One, you realise that LPS, some people just call LIPS, which drives me mad. And also LPS, I really wish we'd realised, stands for The Littlest Pet Shop, which is a TV show which is very popular with quite young children in America. So if you want to console yourself in your darker moments as you're trying to implement LPS, you can think we're about to detain about 300,000 people in the littlest pet shop. LPS critically is going to be some of the things that DOLS doesn't do. Some of the things that DOLS doesn't do aren't relevant for you because you're interested in older adults, but it's going to, for instance, pick up the fact that 16 plus we need to have provision for. It's also going to pick up the fact that DOLS was based on a really odd model of it being an institution that detained you. Cheshire West, the Supreme Court case in 2014, which explained how widely the concept goes, also made clear it's not the institution that detains you, it's the arrangements for you. So say you've got a family member at home, an older adult at home, the adult children are trying to make sure that he or she doesn't have to go into a care setting. They're trying to keep them safe, they're locking the doors. There's no necessary state involvement. There might be, the family are probably doing most of it. That person, if they can't consent and they're confined, they're deprived of their liberty. At the moment, DOLS can't respond to that. In due course, LPS will be able to respond to that. Or somebody who is living at home most of the time, but goes into respite care every so often. LPS could cover all of that, including arrangements for transferring the person between one place and another, and contingency planning to make sure that they return safely. So it's going to be doing a lot of useful stuff, hopefully, in due course. It also implements a very serious policy change, which the Law Commission recommended and DHSC have run with, which is to say deprivation of liberty cannot be seen to be the subject matter expertise of a very small group of people in local authorities, best interest assessors. This has got to be seen as being core business for everybody, including within the NHS. So one of the ways of making sure that that happens is to push responsibility for authorising onto the NHS when the NHS is bringing about the state of affairs. So in future, NHS trusts, hospital trusts in England and in Wales as well, will be responsible for authorising deprivations of liberty in their own hospitals. They won't be going out to local authorities unless it's a situation where the person's going to be detained under the Mental Health Act and they need to get an AMP out to complete the paperwork. So this is a big, big change. It's not this person's deprived of liberty, ask a local authority. It's going to be you are doing this yourself. The NHS is also going to be responsible for situations where somebody is receiving care funded by continuing healthcare in a community. CCGs, or by the time LPS comes in, it won't be CCGs, it's going to be integrated care boards will be responsible. I should say, when I was at the Law Commission, we had endless people, including quite senior people from the NHS coming and saying, please don't give the NHS responsibility because they're rubbish and they don't understand the concept of capacity. I just think that's A, incredibly rude, and B, just a complete counsel of despair. If you keep saying people don't understand things, give it to somebody else, there's no incentive to learn. So there is a big policy shift there, which carries with it a lot of implications. If you're effectively self-authorizing, trusts are going to have in place mechanisms to make sure that when the fox is guarding the hen house, we know what the fox is doing. So what's going to happen in due course? It's the same broad idea as DOLS. So in other words, it's the person, does the person have full capacity to consent to their confinement? We're only interested in people who can't consent. Does the person have a mental disorder? Because we need to tick that box, and bluntly, it is just a box ticking exercise there to comply with the European Convention on Human Rights. And a critically important thing, do we really need to have that person there under those arrangements? Is it really proportionate? That's what you have to think about under DOLS. That's what you're going to be thinking about under LPS. The idea is in due course that consideration of all of that can be done, as it were, in-house by people responsible for the care. That would then be looked at by somebody who's not involved in the day-to-day care and treatment of the person. If there's no reason to believe that the person is unhappy there, there's no reason to believe that the person wants to be anywhere other than in that setting, there can be relatively light touch scrutiny. Where there's reason to believe, so you can see on that slide there, it says heightened scrutiny by AMCP. So that's approved mental capacity professional in RTB cases, reason to believe cases. There's reason to believe the person doesn't want to be there. There has to be a heightened degree of scrutiny. Hospitals will be employing their own AMCPs, mostly. So there'll have to be people employed within the hospital trusts who are in a position to apply a suitable degree of scrutiny. The critical thing is bloody-mindedness. That's what we want. Best interest assessors, bloody-minded, that's what we want of AMCPs as well. So the person who's subject to an authorization has to be represented and supported. And then in some, this may well be relevant in some situations, just for somebody with a longer term situation, DOLS can't be renewed, LPS can be renewed. And I'm going to talk about the interface a little bit more in a minute. But if I could just get the next slide, please, Josie. So what's the point of all of this exercise? The point of this exercise is to try and get it so that people understand that deprivation of liberty is everybody's business, which has two core bits about it. One, it means that insofar as possible, there is identification at an early stage. Is this person likely to be deprived of their liberty? And is there something we can do to stop that happening? Because one of the horrible things about DOLS is everybody else does all the care planning and then presents something to a BIA further down the line and says, is this in the person's best interests? And the best interest assessor says no, but it's all too late now. The person's now in the care home. Their tenancy's been given up, say. If you'd asked me 6 months ago or 3 months ago, I'd have said this is a terrible idea. So insofar as possible, trying to get people to think about it from the outset. Also, insofar as possible, meaning you're not duplicating work. People should already be considering capacity when they're thinking about care planning. They should already be considering, is this really the right thing to do? Is it really necessary? Is it really proportionate? If that stuff can be integrated in the documentation relating to the care planning, then it can be checked off without going and duplicating. That's one of the intentions. Whether it works, we'll have to see, but that's the policy intention. So, and it's not actually about the backlog. In other words, all the cases the local authorities are simply struggling to get through. In reality, that won't it won't actually change the position. In fact, it just won't change the position. That's not the point. So next slide, please, if I may. Sorry, Josie, when you've got a minute. Yeah, so the key changes there, Josie, I won't be very long on this one, just for your reference. So that's just the key changes. Bigger scope, responsibilities lying with NHS bodies in some cases where they don't at the moment. Different levels of scrutiny depending on the extent to which someone's will is being overborne. We don't use the language of best interest in relation to LPS because bluntly, we're not really thinking about best interest when we're thinking about confinement. What we're really thinking about is, do we have to do this? So next slide, please. Yes, so where next? Allegedly, we are talking about April 2022. It is simply not possible. We don't have the code of practice yet. We don't have the regulations yet, which say who can carry out the various tasks. The reason we don't have this yet is a whole series of incredibly irritating things. The most recent reason of incredible irritatingness, that's not a word, but you know what I mean, is that all three of the ministers who were needed in order to sign off on the consultation document were all replaced in Boris's most recent go-round. So the civil servants, having just got 3 ministers to understand what they needed to do, just lost them all and are training 3 more. It is incredibly irritating because a lot of people are wasting a lot of time and a lot of money trying to work out how to implement something, thinking, is it going to be April? There's no way on earth it can be April. I don't know exactly what date it can be. So next slide, please. So what I wanted to then just think a little bit about, and I could see some of the questions coming in the chat function, was about the, and I'm very happy for the slides to be circulated as well. Just talk a little bit about the interface between the Mental Health Act and the Mental Capacity Act, because that's of real importance when we're thinking about older adults. So just to kind of do the policy landscape for a minute. In the context of thinking about reform of the Mental Health Act, you'll recall the government published a white paper earlier this year and then have indicated what they're going to do to respond to Sir Simon Westley's review. The government understands and acknowledges that there's a huge degree of confusion as to which regime is the right regime to use. Is it Mental Health Act? Is it Mental Capacity Act? If you haven't already read that King's Fund report, there's a live link there. I really strongly recommend you do, because that really is some very good detailed work explaining why people fall out massively about, is it Mental Health Act, is it Mental Capacity Act? And part of it is down to people have very different ideas of what constitutes objection to admission or treatment for mental health. And it is particularly so in the case of older adults. It's particularly so in the case of people with dementia. Some people would be saying, this person is making it very, very clear they don't want to be here. I think this person is objecting. Medical treatment for mental disorder has a very broad definition, including nursing care. Therefore, this is an objecting person. Therefore, this person has to be detained under the Mental Health Act. Another person might say, no, 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 no. It's not that this person is objecting to being here. The manifestation of their dementia is that they would be saying they wanted to be leave wherever they are, including at home. They are not objecting. And though that is a recipe for 2 people having an enormous argument and then frequently ringing me up and berating me, both sides berating me, as it were. And that's because the way in which the legislation's set up. Very annoyingly, from my perspective, the government has made it clear they simply don't propose to change their interface. LPS is basically going to replicate the current interface in slightly different language, but it's still going to remain the case. You are not allowed to use the Mental Capacity Act if you have somebody who is in a so-called objecting mental health patient. You just have to use the Mental Health Act. If a person is a non-objecting patient, being there to be admitted to assessed and treated for mental disorder in circumstances of confinement, non-objecting have to try and work out which is the best regime. How on earth do you identify what the best regime is? Bearing in mind, of course, that LPS, as with DOLS, doesn't carry any entitlement to Section 117 aftercare. Detain someone on Section 3 Mental Health Act, they get 117 aftercare. That is worth a lot. What is least restricted? I mean, it's a very irritating situation. The one thing which is really, really potentially going to make an enormous difference here, though, is the bottom point here. If you are operating within an NHS hospital, bearing in mind what I said earlier, that NHS trusts are going to be responsible for authorising situations. NHS trusts are going to be deciding for themselves, is this person a physical health patient? Is this person a mental health patient? In other words, what's the real reason they're here? And if they're an objecting mental health patient, or sorry, if they're a mental health patient, are they an objecting mental health patient? It would only be if they got to the point of thinking this is an objecting mental health patient, the NHS trust would be reaching out to a local authority, which is a very, very different position to the one at present, where trusts are always having to reach out to a local authority, either to get a DOLS authorization or to have someone come along and provide an AM. I am going to keep a very careful eye, because I've been involved in this field for rather too long now. I'm going to keep a very careful eye on the rates of sectioning of older adults, because one could see a world in which the rates of sectioning go down dramatically, because those doctors who feel very, very uncomfortable about deploying the Mental Health Act on older adults with dementia and are feeling that they have to, because BIAs are coming along and telling them, no, no, this is an objecting mental health patient, they will be able to use the Mental Health Act. It will be very interesting, and whenever a lawyer says interesting, all the rest of you should panic. It will be very interesting to see what happens here. And this is the sort of thing CQC are going to be keeping a very close eye on. So as I say, the interface itself won't change, but there's going to be a fundamentally different proposition in relation to NHS trusts. I should just, for completeness, make clear, if you have an older adult or anybody who is detained in an independent mental health hospital, the local authority will always be involved, because independent hospitals, including independent mental health hospitals, aren't allowed to self-authorize. The local authority will always be doing that. So this bit I've just been talking about, same interface, very different application, won't apply in the private sector or independent sector. So that's a kind of, oh, sorry, Nahid, sorry, the LD exception, sorry, I whizzed over that. That's simply that you're not allowed to use, you can't detain someone under the Mental Health Act if they have a learning disability, unless the learning disability is associated with abnormally aggressive or seriously irresponsible conduct. So you will be able to use LPS as at the moment, as with dolls, you could use LPS for somebody with a learning disability not associated with that, even if they are vigorously objecting to being there. I think that's just really odd. But that's how the law is, and that's how the law is going to remain. So I think that may be my last slide. I just got a resources slide, Josie, I think. So I've now, yes. So just if you want more resources, and then there are a couple of questions I'll pick up on, just resources wise. So the first is we do a case law database in Chambers, or maintain a resources database in Chambers. That's that top link there. Cases appear there, or capacity cases. You can also find guidance notes, including things like deprivation of liberty in a hospital setting. We've done a guidance note there. The other one I'll just pull out is that one, Mental Capacity Law and Policy, which is my website. On it, you might find of use, there's an LPS resources page, which has got both a walkthrough of the LPS, which is a different version of this, things to do whilst we're waiting for implementation, a shed-inar there. So I'm coming to you from my shed. So I've got kind of shed-inars there, 20 minutes on and 20 minutes on the concept of deprivation of liberty, say, 20 minutes on concept of capacity, 20 minutes on the current interface between the Mental Health Act and the Mental Capacity Act, if that's useful. So just very quickly, just a couple of those questions, I think some of them I've already answered.
I think there was a specific one, Alex, from William Lee. If we could unmute William.
Yeah.
Will had a specific question for us quite early on.
Hello. Thanks for a great talk. Your suggestion that it isn't a good idea to get an actual lawyer in, my own view, which I'm sure would be echoed by pretty much everyone else, is what we definitely need is at least one actual lawyer. And I can't remember my actual question. I'm going to whiz back here, but broadly speaking, what I was saying was, I'm guessing, but I don't know. Can I whiz to my question? Because there's been a lot of chat since.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find, yeah.
I'm just trying here we go. Oh, mine are in blue. Oh, that's clever. Here we are. Here we are. I'm guessing, but don't know, that unlawful detentions in a broad sense in acute hospitals are rife, whether that is no dolls when there should be, Cheshire West type, or dolls lapsed or done wrongly. Is this right? Or is there any evidence, has anyone collected this systematically?
Well, one of the things that that King's Fund report points out is, partly because of confusion, it is quite likely that quite a few people are unlawfully deprived of their liberty. There's a whole separate issue I haven't talked about in relation to deprivation of liberty in a hospital setting, which is where people are getting immediately necessary life-saving physical health treatment. The concept of deprivation of liberty applies in a different way. For time purposes, I didn't dwell on that, but there is. So it's not that everybody who looks like they're confined in an acute hospital is necessarily to be considered to be deprived of liberty. But any situation where, for instance, you've got an older adult in a ward, they are potentially clinically fit for discharge, they're not getting immediately necessary life-saving physical health treatment, that's the zone where we need to be thinking about it. And yes, every single time I go and give a talk at a hospital, obviously in the before times it was for it live, I would have the ward manager going off and looking a bit nervous at the end of the talk. So yes, I mean, I think there are definitely lots of situations where people are, but being nice, it's because people are prioritizing trying to give care. Being less nice, it's because people don't think this is very important or don't understand the concept and don't place the importance on it that they should do.
Thank you. And I think another question that's come up from Ben Wood, which is something I raised in the chat as well, is that can you see a situation where us as old age liaison psychiatrists are very much going to be sucked into this process of making decisions about, is this person have a mental disorder, and trying to negotiate that. I have a gut feeling that it could be sending a lot of work our way if we're not clear about where our boundaries lie.
Well, yes, you will be, because people within trusts are going to be required to give the evidence of does this person have a mental disorder. What is important to emphasize is that the government are very, very keen to expand the range of people who can say somebody's got a mental disorder. Doles, it's only Section 12 doctors. They, under LPS, they are really, really wanting to be having any medical professional. So it's not just, it isn't potentially just a psychiatrist. There is a real legal crunch point about whether that's legitimate if somebody's never had a diagnosis of a mental disorder before. But yeah, you need to, this is part of the point, is if this is self-authorizing, at the moment, local authorities would go and, as it were, commission someone else to come in, and it may or may not be somebody within the hospital. So yeah, you need to be very careful and make clear, for instance, it's not a very good idea deploying us on somebody who's got a pre-existing diagnosis, because you don't have to. You could get somebody else. And one of the members of the treating team, the doctor, who is not necessarily the psychiatrist. So if it's a general adult situation, they're going to have a consultant in charge, and not necessarily the consultant who's doing it, but one of the medical team could be doing it. Yeah, otherwise you're going to get sucked into a whole load of situations. It's a complete waste of your time and resource to be doing.
Yeah. I think, Alex, we're going to have to wrap up, but I think that this has been an amazing start for our seminars. We're so lucky that we had you as our first speaker, because there's so much in this. I've got a feeling that we could probably do an afternoon just on this issue, that everyone would be very pleased to attend and find very, very helpful. I think being forewarned is being forearmed for us as a speciality. So thank you so much. I'm just going to wrap up now. So I'd like to thank Annabel and Krish and the team for organising this, and particularly Josie, who's put in a huge amount of effort. We're sorry if there are any technical glitches, it's our first time, but we really appreciate, Josie, everything you've done to set this up. We will be sending out a summary and the slides and a summary of the questions. Please give feedback and let us know any other topics you'd like us to tackle in the future. We really want ideas from people for this to be a very bottom-up generated network. So please let us know if there's anything you'd like us to cover in future seminars. And that's via the feedback form, or email us. It's been a fantastic first meeting. We will draw it to a close now because we're coming up to 5 o'clock. But thank you again, Alex. And if we were in a room with you, we would give you a massive round of applause. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. And thanks, Josie. I think.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Bye now.